The sky bled crimson as the sun dipped below the rugged horizon, painting the rushing waters of the Sweetwater River with streaks of gold and amber. Temperance Guthrie never imagined this would be her last sunset as she desperately clutched at nothing, the powerful current dragging her deeper into the murky depths. Her lungs burned, vision blurring, the world above growing distant with each passing second. Then, like an apparition from some half-remembered dream, a figure cut through the water above her, strong arms reaching down, pulling her against a solid chest as a voice rough as sandpaper commanded against her ear. "Breathe with me." Wyoming Territory, 1876. Temperance had never meant to end up in Sweetwater Junction. The small frontier town situated along the newly constructed railroad wasn't even on her map when she'd fled Boston 3 weeks prior. But fate, it seemed, had other designs for the 22-year-old schoolteacher. "Last stop before we continue west, folks," the conductor had called that morning. 30-minute water stop at Sweetwater Junction. Temperance had gathered her modest belongings, one carpet bag containing 2 dresses, undergarments, a few books, and the remainder of her savings, and stepped down from the train to stretch her legs. The small platform was bustling with activity, cowboys and settlers mingling with merchants and railroad workers. "Beautiful day, ain't it?" an elderly woman remarked beside her. "Indeed," Temperance replied, breathing in the fresh mountain air, so different from the coal-choked atmosphere of Boston. "You heading all the way to California, dear?" "No, madam. San Francisco eventually, but I plan to stop in Denver first." The older woman nodded sagely. "Fine place, Denver. Getting quite civilized these days." Temperance smiled politely, but her attention had drifted to a commotion near the ticket office. A man in a worn buckskin jacket was arguing with the station master, his voice carrying across the platform. "What do you mean the bridge is out?" "I've got 30 head of cattle that need to cross that river. Flash flood 2 nights ago, Mr. Jackson. Washed out the crossing completely. Engineers say it'll be at least 2 weeks before repairs are finished." The Cowboy Jackson removed his hat and ran a hand through sun-bleached hair. 2 weeks? Damn it all to hell. "Language, sir." The station master nodded toward a group of women nearby, including Temperance, who quickly averted her eyes. She wandered toward the edge of the platform, admiring the town. It wasn't much a main street with a general store, saloon, small hotel, and various other establishments necessary for frontier living. Beyond the buildings lay open country, sagebrush dotting the landscape, and in the distance, the shimmer of water caught her eye. The Sweetwater River, she presumed. The whistle blew, signaling passengers to reboard. Temperance turned back toward the train when a gust of wind snatched her handkerchief from her pocket. She lunged to catch it, but it danced just beyond her grasp, fluttering toward the edge of the platform. "Oh!" she exclaimed, making one final grab as the delicate cloth, a gift from her mother, sailed over the edge. Without thinking, she leaned too far, the heel of her boot catching on a loose board. The world tilted, and with a startled cry, Temperance pitched forward, tumbling off the platform. Her head struck something hard. Pain exploded behind her eyes and darkness claimed her. When consciousness returned, the first thing Temperance noticed was the gentle rocking motion beneath her. Opening her eyes slowly, she found herself lying on a narrow bed in an unfamiliar room. The walls were rough-hewn logs, a small window letting in the afternoon light. "You're awake." The voice came from across the room. Temperance struggled to sit up, wincing as pain throbbed behind her temples. "Careful now." A man stepped into view, tall, broad-shouldered, with features chiseled from years under the western sun. His eyes, startlingly blue against his tanned skin, regarded her with concern. "That was quite a fall you took." "The train," she gasped, suddenly remembering. "I've missed my train." "Afraid so, madam. Left about 3 hours ago." Temperance closed her eyes, despair washing over her. "My belongings." "Your carpet-bag is right there." He nodded toward the floor beside her bed. "Station master had it unloaded when you couldn't be roused." "Thank you, Mr. Jackson." "Rhett Jackson." He offered a slight bow. "And you might be Temperance Guthrie." She touched the tender spot on her temple. "What happened? You fell from the platform, hit your head on a crate. Dr. Simmons said you've got a mild concussion. Nothing serious, but you need rest." He shifted uncomfortably. "My ranch is closest to town, so I volunteered to bring you here until you're recovered." Alarm flashed across her face. "That's very kind, but highly inappropriate. I should stay at the hotel in town." A crooked smile touched his lips. "Madam, Sweetwater Junction's hotel is 4 rooms above the saloon, and they're all occupied by cattle buyers from Chicago." He gestured around the room. "This is my mother's room. She passed 3 winters ago. You'll have privacy here, and Mrs. Caldwell from the next ranch over is coming to stay as chaperone." Temperance relaxed slightly. "I appreciate your consideration, Mr. Jackson. It's the least I could do." He handed her a cup of water. "Besides, I figure you being stranded here might be Providence." "Providence?" She sipped the cool water gratefully. "The schoolteacher position. Town's been advertising for months. No takers yet." Temperance nearly choked on her water. "How did you know I'm a teacher?" He nodded toward her open carpet bag, where several educational texts were visible. "Those books aren't typical reading for a young lady traveling west unless she's planning to teach." "I was headed to Denver," she said softly. "I had a position arranged." Rhett leaned against the doorframe. "Well, Miss Guthrie, seems fate had other ideas. Rest now. We can discuss your options when you're feeling better." As he turned to leave, Temperance called out, "Mr. Jackson, why were you arguing with the station master earlier?" He paused, his broad shoulders tensing slightly. "I need to get my cattle across the river to the railroad in Laramie. With the bridge out, I'm facing ruin." His voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of self-pity. "But that's not your concern. Rest now." The door closed quietly behind him, leaving Temperance alone with her thoughts. She'd left Boston in such haste, fleeing a situation that had become untenable. Perhaps this unexpected detour was indeed Providence. With that comforting thought, she allowed her eyes to close, sleep claiming her once more. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and introductions. Mrs. Caldwell, a cheerful widow in her 50s, arrived with a trunk of essentials and immediately took charge of Temperance's care. The ranch house was modest but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, kitchen area, 2 bedrooms and Rhett's office. Outside stood a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a barn, corrals, and various outbuildings. Rhett himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but kept his distance, leaving early each morning to work with his men and returning late for supper. From Mrs. Caldwell, Temperance learned he'd inherited the Rocking J Ranch 5 years earlier when his father died, and had built it into one of the most prosperous operations in the territory. Never married, though every girl in 3 counties has set her cap for him, Mrs. Caldwell confided one afternoon as they shelled peas on the porch. "Too busy with the ranch, I suppose." On her 4th day at the ranch, Temperance felt well enough to venture outside. The early June air was crisp and clean, scented with sage and pine from the distant mountains. She walked slowly to the corral where several cowhands were breaking horses, their whoops and calls filling the air. Rhett stood outside the fence, calling instructions. He spotted her approaching and immediately strode to meet her. "Miss Guthrie, you shouldn't be out of bed yet." "I'm quite recovered, Mr. Jackson, thanks to your hospitality." She offered a smile. Besides, I was beginning to feel like an invalid. A commotion from the corral drew their attention. A young cowboy had been thrown from a bucking bronco and lay motionless in the dust. Damn it! Rhett vaulted the fence, rushing to the fallen man's side. "Tommy, can you hear me?" The ranch hands gathered around as Rhett gently turned the young man over. Blood streamed from a gash on his forehead where he'd struck the fence post. Without thinking, Temperance lifted her skirts and ducked through the fence rails. "Let me see," she said, kneeling beside them. "I have some medical training." Rhett gave her a surprised look but moved aside. Temperance examined the wound carefully. "It's not as bad as it looks. Head wounds always bleed profusely." She tore a strip from her petticoat. "I need clean water and whiskey if you have it." One of the cowboys hurried to comply while Temperance applied pressure to the wound. Tommy groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Lie still," she instructed. "You've had a nasty fall." When the water and whiskey arrived, she cleaned the wound efficiently, then stitched it closed with needle and thread from her pocket sewing kit. The cowboys watched in amazement. "Where did you learn to do that?" Rhett asked as they helped Tommy to the bunkhouse afterward. "My father was a doctor in Boston," she replied. "He insisted I learn basic medical care. Said a woman never knew when such skills might be needed, especially one who planned to teach in remote areas." Something shifted in Rhett's expression, a new respect, perhaps. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly, the past tense hanging between them. That evening after supper, Rhett invited Temperance to join him on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the distant mountains silhouetted against the fading light. "I spoke with Mayor Collins in town today," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "The school position is still open if you're interested." Temperance considered the offer. She had enough money to continue to Denver, but something about this place, this wild, beautiful country, called to her. What would it entail? 20 children, ages 6 to 16. Schoolhouse is new, built last year. Pay isn't much, $40 a month, but includes a small cottage behind the building. When would they need me to start? School term begins in September, but they'd like the teacher in place by July to prepare. He studied her profile in the fading light. "Of course, you had plans for Denver." Temperance turned to face him. "Mr. Jackson, may I ask you something personal?" He nodded cautiously. "Why did you help me? You could have left me at the doctor's office in town." Rhett was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "When I saw you fall, something just—" "I don't know." He shook his head. "My mother always said we don't choose the people who come into our lives, but we choose what to do when they arrive." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within her. "I think I would like to accept the teaching position, at least temporarily." A smile, the first genuine one she'd seen from him, transformed his face. "Sweetwater Junction just got a whole lot more civilized, Miss Guthrie." The following week brought significant changes. Temperance moved from the ranch to the teacher's cottage in town, a snug 2-room structure with a small garden plot out back. Mayor Collins and his wife welcomed her warmly, as did most of the townspeople, eager to have a proper schoolteacher for their children. Though she was now settled in town, Rhett made a point of riding in every few days, ostensibly to check on her recovery, but lingering to help with small repairs around the cottage or simply to share conversation over coffee. "The cattle still weighing on your mind?" she asked one afternoon as they sat on her small porch. He nodded grimly. "Bridge won't be repaired for another week at least. By then, the best prices at market will be gone." He sighed, running a hand through his sun-bleached hair. "I've been considering an alternative, but it's risky." "What alternative?" "There's a ford upriver about 10 miles north. Dangerous this time of year with the snowmelt, but passable with care. If we could get the herd across there, we could make the Laramie connection in time. Temperance studied his profile, the strong jaw clenched in determination, the lines of worry etched around his eyes. In the short time she'd known him, she'd come to admire his quiet strength and integrity. "When will you try?" she asked. "Tomorrow at dawn. The men are getting the herd ready now." He turned to her, his expression softening. "Enough about my troubles. How are you settling in?" "Quite well. I've been reviewing the school records and preparing lessons." She hesitated, then added, "I've also been invited to the Founders' Day celebration this Saturday." "Ah, yes. Biggest event of the year around here." His eyes held hers. "Will you save me a dance, Miss Guthrie?" The question, delivered with such casual charm, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "I would be delighted, Mr. Jackson." His smile warmed her more than the afternoon sun. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the entire town turning out for the Founders' Day celebration. Main Street had been transformed with bunting and banners. Tables laden with food lined the boardwalks, and a platform for dancing had been erected in the town square. Temperance wore her best dress, blue muslin with white lace trim, and allowed Mrs. Collins to arrange her chestnut hair in a becoming style with ribbon accents. Throughout the morning, she was introduced to dozens of parents and their children, all curious about the new schoolteacher. By midday, there was still no sign of Rhett. Worry niggled at her. Had something gone wrong at the river crossing? She tried to focus on the festivities, but her eyes constantly scanned the crowd for his tall figure. As afternoon stretched toward evening and the dancing began, Temperance found herself partnered with various townsmen, the blacksmith, a cattle buyer from Chicago, even Mayor Collins himself. Each time the music ended, her gaze drifted toward the edge of town, hoping to see riders approaching. "He'll be here," Mrs. Caldwell said, appearing at her side with a cup of punch. "That boy never breaks a promise." "I wasn't," Temperance began, then sighed at the knowing look in the older woman's eyes. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's lived long enough to recognize the signs." Mrs. Caldwell patted her arm. "Rhett Jackson is a good man, stubborn as the day is long but good to his core." The music started again, a lively Virginia reel that had couples lining up eagerly. Temperance declined an invitation from the general store owner, retreating to a quiet corner to catch her breath. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in familiar hues of gold and crimson. A murmur ran through the crowd, heads turning toward the south end of town. Riders were approaching 5 men on horseback, trail-worn and dusty. At their head rode Rhett, his hat pulled low over his eyes. The group dismounted at the edge of the celebration. Temperance watched as Mayor Collins hurried to greet them, words exchanged in low tones. Whatever news Rhett delivered seemed to sober the mayor, his jovial expression fading as he nodded gravely. Rhett handed his reins to one of his men and made his way through the crowd. Despite his obvious fatigue, he moved with purpose, acknowledging greetings with brief nods until he reached Temperance's side. "You made it," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "I promised you a dance." His eyes held shadows she hadn't seen before. "Though I'm not fit company at the moment." "What happened?" He glanced around at the festive gathering. "Not here. Would you walk with me?" They slipped away from the celebration, strolling toward the quiet end of Main Street. In the gathering dusk, the sounds of music and laughter faded behind them. "We lost 7 head at the crossing," he said finally. "River was higher than expected, and Tommy—" He stopped walking, his jaw tight. "The current took him. We searched for hours, but—" He shook his head. "He was just a kid. 18. First drive. Temperance's heart ached for his loss. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry, Rhett." It was the first time she'd used his given name. His eyes met hers, filled with pain and something else, a vulnerability he likely showed to few others. "I shouldn't have risked it," he said roughly. "Those cattle weren't worth a man's life. You couldn't have known." "I did know. I knew that ford was dangerous this time of year." His hands clenched into fists. "But I was so determined to make that market deadline." Temperance stepped closer, her hand moving to cover his. "You're being too hard on yourself." Tommy knew the risks of a cowboy's life. Rhett looked down at her hand on his, then slowly unclenched his fist, turning his palm up to grasp her fingers. "Thank you for that, Temperance." He said her name like it was something precious. "I should get back to the ranch. The boys' parents will need to be notified." "Of course." She started to withdraw her hand, but he held it a moment longer. "Rain check on that dance?" he asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I'll hold you to it, Mr. Jackson." He tipped his hat and walked away, shoulders squared against the burden he carried. Temperance watched until he disappeared into the gathering darkness, her heart following him. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Temperance prepared for the upcoming school term. She inventoried supplies, organized the schoolroom, and visited families to meet her future pupils. The work was engaging, helping to distract her from thoughts of Rhett, who had not returned to town since the Founders' Day celebration. News from the Rocking J reached her through Mrs. Caldwell. The remaining cattle had been successfully driven to market, though at reduced prices. Tommy's family had been compensated generously, far beyond what the young cowhand's contract stipulated. And Rhett had thrown himself into ranch work with a grim determination that worried his men. July turned to August, bringing scorching days and the occasional violent thunderstorm. One such afternoon, Temperance was returning from delivering reading primers to a family outside town when the sky darkened ominously. She quickened her pace, but the storm moved faster. Within minutes, rain poured down in blinding sheets, soaking her to the skin. Seeking shelter, she diverted to a small covered bridge that spanned a usually dry creek bed, connecting the main road to several outlying farms. By the time she reached it, the creek had transformed into a rushing torrent, muddy water rising alarmingly fast beneath the bridge. Inside the covered structure, Temperance wrung water from her skirts, grateful for the temporary refuge. Thunder crashed overhead, lightning illuminating the interior in brief, blinding flashes. Through the deluge, she heard an unexpected sound, a horse's frightened whinny. Peering through the rain at the far end of the bridge, she made out a silhouette, a rider urging a reluctant horse forward into the shelter. Recognition came with the next lightning flash. "Rhett," he dismounted quickly, leading his nervous gelding into the bridge. Water streamed from his slicker and hat as he secured the horse to a post. "Temperance, what in blazes are you doing out in this storm?" His voice held both surprise and concern. "Delivering school materials." She gestured to her sodden bag. "I thought I could make it back before the rain hit." That was poorly calculated. But there was no reproach in his tone, only relief as he removed his slicker and draped it around her shoulders. "You're shivering." The oilskin coat enveloped her in warmth, and his scent leather, pine, and something distinctly male. "Thank you." "What brings you this way?" Meeting with a horse trader. He removed his hat, shaking water from the brim. "Got caught in the same predicament as you." The bridge creaked ominously as another thunderclap shook the air. Outside, the water continued to rise, now lapping at the wooden supports. "I don't like the sound of that," Rhett muttered, moving to the opening to assess the situation. "Creek's rising too fast. This old bridge wasn't built for such strain." Anxiety tightened Temperance's chest. "Will it hold?" "Hard to say." He returned to her side. Best we move to higher ground once there's a break in the downpour. They stood in companionable silence, listening to the rain hammer the wooden roof. Temperance was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid, reassuring, yet somehow making her more nervous than the storm. "I've missed seeing you in town," she said finally, keeping her eyes on the rain-drenched landscape. "Been busy at the ranch." His voice was gruff. "And I figured you had enough to manage without my troubles darkening your door." She turned to face him. "Is that what you think? That I find your company troublesome?" In the dim light, his expression was difficult to read. "I'm not exactly society's idea of a suitable companion for a refined Boston schoolteacher. I left Boston precisely to escape society's ideas of what's suitable for me." The vehemence in her tone surprised them both. Rhett studied her face. "You never did say why you left so suddenly." Temperance hesitated. She hadn't spoken of it to anyone, but something about this man invited confidence. "I was engaged," she said quietly, "to the son of my father's business partner. It was arranged after my father died, when our financial situation became precarious." "You didn't love him," Rhett stated rather than asked. "No, and when I discovered he had improper relationships with several other women, I broke the engagement." She turned away, the memory still painful. "His family threatened to ruin what remained of my reputation if I didn't reconsider, so I left." Rhett's hand touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You're brave, Temperance Guthrie." She shook her head. "Running away isn't brave. Standing up for yourself is." His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. "Not many would have the courage to start over in a place like this." A tremendous crack split the air, not thunder, but the sound of wood splintering. The bridge shuddered beneath their feet. "We need to move. Now." Rhett grabbed her hand, pulling her toward his horse. "Bridge is giving way." He untied the gelding and swung into the saddle, then reached down for her. Temperance grasped his arm, letting him pull her up behind him. The horse danced nervously as another crack echoed through the structure. "Hold tight," Rhett called over his shoulder as he urged the horse forward. They'd barely cleared the bridge when a section of the wooden flooring collapsed behind them, falling into the churning waters below. The gelding, spooked by the noise, reared suddenly. Temperance, not expecting the movement, lost her grip on Rhett's waist and slid sideways from the saddle. She hit the muddy ground with a jarring impact that knocked the breath from her lungs. Disoriented, she rolled toward what she thought was the roadway, but instead found empty space where the bank had been eroded by the rising waters. With a terrified cry, Temperance tumbled down the embankment into the raging creek. The cold was shocking, the force of the current immediately pulling her under. She flailed desperately, her sodden skirts weighing her down like anchors. Breaking the surface briefly, she gasped for air before being dragged under again, tumbling helplessly in the murky torrent. Her lungs burned, consciousness beginning to fade when strong arms suddenly encircled her waist. She was pulled against a solid chest, dragged upward until her face broke the surface. "Breathe with me," Rhett's voice commanded in her ear. "Slow and steady." Together they fought the current, Rhett using one powerful arm to swim while the other kept her secured against him. Temperance tried to help, kicking her legs as best she could, but the weight of her clothing made movement nearly impossible. The creek widened as it joined the Sweetwater River, the current growing stronger still. Rhett angled them toward the opposite bank where the water curved outward, creating a small eddy of calmer water. "Almost there," he gasped, his strength clearly flagging. "Just a little more." With one final push, they reached the shallows. Rhett dragged them both onto the muddy bank, collapsing beside her as they gulped air into starved lungs. The rain had slackened to a gentle patter, the worst of the storm moving eastward. When Temperance could finally speak, she turned to find Rhett watching her, his blue eyes dark with concern. "You saved my life," she whispered. "Couldn't very well let Sweetwater Junction lose its schoolteacher before term even started," he replied, his attempt at lightness belied by the intensity of his gaze. She reached out, her trembling fingers touching his cheek. "Thank you." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of what they might mean to each other. Rhett's hand covered hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his face. "When I saw you go under," he said roughly, "I thought my heart would stop." Words failed her. Instead, Temperance leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a brief, tender touch that nevertheless sent warmth cascading through her chilled body. When she pulled back, the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "We should find shelter," he said, his voice husky. "Night's coming, and these wet clothes will be the death of us." Rhett helped her to her feet, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle. His horse had disappeared, likely heading back to the familiar security of the ranch. "There's a lined shack about half a mile upriver," he said, scanning the darkening landscape. "Used by the hands during roundup. It's basic, but dry." Supporting each other, they made their way slowly along the riverbank. By the time the small cabin came into view, twilight had fallen, the storm clouds parting to reveal the first stars of evening. The lined shack was indeed basic, a single room with a small stone fireplace, narrow cot, rough table, and 2 chairs. A shelf held emergency supplies, matches, tinned food, a medical kit, and a bottle of whiskey. Rhett quickly got a fire started while Temperance stood shivering by the door. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly, though a flush colored his cheekbones. "There should be some spare clothing in that trunk." He nodded toward a wooden chest in the corner. "I'll wait outside while you change." "Don't be ridiculous," she said through chattering teeth. "You're as soaked as I am. We'll take turns. You can turn your back." Practical necessity overcame propriety. Rhett faced the wall while Temperance peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments, wrapping herself in a rough wool blanket from the trunk before slipping into an oversized flannel shirt that hung to her knees. "Your turn," she said, facing away as he shed his wet clothing and donned a dry pair of denims and a shirt. They hung their wet garments near the fireplace, now blazing with welcome heat. Rhett found a can of beans and some jerky, which they shared in companionable silence, both too exhausted for conversation. As the fire's warmth penetrated their chilled bodies, Temperance felt the events of the day catching up with her. She swayed slightly in her chair. "You should take the cot," Rhett said, noticing her fatigue. "I'll manage with these blankets by the fire." Too tired to argue, Temperance curled up on the narrow bed, pulling the coarse blanket around her shoulders. From across the room came the sounds of Rhett banking the fire for the night, his movements quiet and efficient. "Rhett," she called softly as he settled onto his makeshift bed. Why did you really stay away these past weeks?" The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, his voice came through the darkness. "Because every time I close my eyes, I see Tommy going under that river, and then I see you standing in that schoolhouse, surrounded by children who depend on you." His words were measured, careful. "I'm not the kind of man who deserves someone like you, Temperance." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" she asked, propping herself up on one elbow to look at his silhouette by the dying fire. "You don't know me, not really. I know enough." She let the words hang between them, then added softly, "Good night, Rhett." "Good night, Temperance." Sleep claimed her almost instantly, her dreams filled with rushing water and strong arms pulling her to safety. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Temperance awoke to find Rhett already up, rekindling the fire and heating coffee in a small pot. Their clothes, mostly dry, were folded neatly on the table. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. "Couple hours." He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Figured you needed the rest. Thank you." She accepted the cup gratefully, the bitter liquid warming her from within. "How do we get back to town from here?" "I walked down to the main road earlier. Found my horse grazing about a quarter-mile away." A smile touched his lips. "Loyal beast came looking for me." They dressed in their still damp clothing, neither mentioning the intimacy of the night before. Outside, the world was washed clean by the storm, wildflowers dotting the riverbank with splashes of color. Rhett helped her mount the gelding, then swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as they set off toward town. They rode in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what had transpired between them and what might come next. As they approached Sweetwater Junction, Temperance tensed slightly. "People will talk," she said quietly, "seeing us ride in together after being missing overnight." Rhett's arms tightened briefly around her waist. "Let them. Nothing improper happened." "That kiss," she reminded him, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. His chuckle rumbled against her back. "That was the most proper thing that's happened to me in years." Mayor Collins spotted them first as they rode down Main Street, hurrying to meet them with evident relief. "Miss Guthrie, Mr. Jackson, we've had search parties out since dawn." A small crowd gathered as Rhett explained about the bridge collapse and their night in the line shack. Mrs. Caldwell appeared, wrapping a dry shawl around Temperance's shoulders while shooting knowing glances between her and Rhett. "You'll stay with us tonight, dear," Mrs. Collins insisted to Temperance. "That cottage of yours needs to dry out properly after all this rain." Rhett dismounted, then helped Temperance down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I should head back to the ranch," he said. "The men will be worried." "Will I see you again soon?" she asked quietly, mindful of the curious onlookers. His eyes held hers, warm with promise. "Count on it, Miss Guthrie." True to his word, Rhett returned to town 3 days later. Temperance was in her classroom, arranging desks in neat rows when his shadow darkened the doorway. "School doesn't start for another month," she said, smiling as she straightened. "Or are you looking to continue your education, Mr. Jackson?" "I'm a slow learner," he replied, stepping into the room and removing his hat. "Might need some special attention." The teasing note in his voice sent a pleasant warmth through her. "I'm not sure my teaching methods would suit you." "Oh, I don't know about that." He closed the distance between them, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've already taught me a few things." "Such as?" "That sometimes what a man needs most isn't what he thinks he wants." He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I told myself I was staying away for your sake. Truth is, I was scared." Temperance's breath caught. "Of what? Of this?" He gestured between them. "Of feeling something I can't control. Something that matters more than cattle or land or anything else I thought was important." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "And now I'm here to ask if you'll have dinner with me tonight, at the hotel restaurant, where everyone can see us together." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "I want to court you properly, Temperance Guthrie, if you'll let me." Joy bubbled up inside her, but caution tempered it. "Are you certain? I'm just a schoolteacher and you're—" "A rancher with mud on his boots and calluses on his hands." He smiled wryly. "Not exactly what your Boston society would consider a good match." "I left Boston society behind," she reminded him, stepping closer. "And I happen to like those calloused hands." His smile widened, reaching his eyes and transforming his face. "Is that a yes to dinner?" "It's a yes to dinner," she confirmed, her own smile matching his, and perhaps to more given time. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and thrilling. "I've got all the time in the world for you, Miss Guthrie." Over the following weeks, their courtship became the talk of Sweetwater Junction. Rhett rode into town every few days, sometimes bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered along the trail. They attended church together on Sundays, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and took walks along the now peaceful river. Each meeting deepened their connection, as they shared stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. When the school term began in September, Rhett was there on the first day, leaning against his horse outside the schoolhouse as children filed in with curious glances at the tall rancher. "Moral support?" Temperance asked during a brief moment alone. "Something like that." He nodded toward the classroom. "Those kids are lucky to have you." "As are you," she teased, emboldened by the warmth in his eyes. "Don't I know it?" He tipped his hat. "Dinner tonight to celebrate your first day." Their courtship continued through the autumn months, as leaves turned gold and the first frost silvered the morning grass. Rhett became a familiar figure in Temperance's classroom, sometimes stopping by to help with repairs or to tell the children stories of cattle drives and frontier life. By November, as Thanksgiving approached, it was clear to everyone in Sweetwater Junction that the handsome rancher and the schoolteacher were deeply in love. Yet neither had spoken those words aloud, each perhaps waiting for the other to take that final step. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A heavy early snowfall had closed the school for the day, and Rhett had appeared at Temperance's cottage to ensure she had enough firewood and supplies. As he stacked logs beside her stove, she watched him from her small kitchen table, a sense of rightness settling over her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "You," she answered honestly. "Us, how different my life would be if I hadn't missed that train." He straightened, brushing wood dust from his hands. "Regrets?" "Not a single one." She rose and moved to stand before him. "Rhett Jackson, I need to tell you something." His expression grew serious. "I'm listening. I love you." The words, simple and true, filled the space between them. "I've loved you since you pulled me from that river and told me to breathe with you." Perhaps even before that. For a moment he stood perfectly still, his eyes darkening with emotion. Then he pulled her into his arms, his embrace fierce yet tender. "I love you, Temperance Guthrie," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." When he kissed her, it was with a passion that had been building for months, no longer held in check by propriety or doubt. Temperance responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as she surrendered to the feelings she'd kept carefully controlled. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads touching as they steadied themselves against the surge of emotion. "Marry me," Rhett said, the words somewhere between a question and a command. "Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children." He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "I know it's not the life you might have had in Boston. It's better," she interrupted. "It's real. It's ours." Her smile was radiant as she nodded. "Yes, Rhett Jackson, I will marry you." They were married on Christmas Eve in the small white church of Sweetwater Junction, snow falling gently outside as they spoke their vows before the entire town. Temperance wore a gown of ivory satin that Mrs. Collins and Mrs. Caldwell had helped her make, her chestnut hair adorned with sprigs of holly. Rhett, in a new black suit that made his blue eyes even more striking, watched her walk down the aisle with undisguised adoration. "I take you, Temperance Guthrie, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As she repeated the vows, Temperance's voice trembled with emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rhett's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at the hotel was joyous, with music and dancing late into the night. As snow continued to fall outside, Rhett led his bride in a waltz, finally fulfilling his promise of a dance. "Happy, Mrs. Jackson," he murmured as they swayed together. "Completely," she answered, her eyes shining with love, "and you more than I deserve." His arms tightened around her. "You saved me, you know." "I believe it was you who saved me, husband, from the river and from a life half-lived." Later, as they drove through the snowy night toward the ranch that would now be their home, Temperance nestled against Rhett's side beneath the heavy buffalo robe, contentment filling her heart. The rocking J Ranch welcomed its new mistress, with windows aglow with lamplight, the ranch hands having prepared the house for the newlyweds' arrival. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, the main room decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jackson," Rhett said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Their first night as husband and wife was everything Temperance had dreamed, tender, passionate, a joining of bodies and souls that left them both breathless with wonder. As they lay entwined afterward, Rhett's heart beat strong beneath her cheek. She knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, as if nature itself celebrated their union. The ranch flourished under their combined care, Rhett managing the cattle and land, Temperance continuing to teach in town, while establishing a bountiful garden and organizing the household with efficient grace. On warm evenings, they often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar hues of gold and crimson. Sometimes they spoke of the future, the children they hoped for, the growth of the ranch, the development of Sweetwater Junction. Other times they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence between them, secure in their love and the life they were building. One such evening, as summer approached again, Temperance turned to her husband with a smile that held a secret. "What is it?" he asked, recognizing the special light in her eyes. "I visited Dr. Simmons today," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Joy transformed Rhett's face as he gathered her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "When January, the doctor thinks," she laughed as he spun her in a gentle circle. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased." He set her carefully on her feet, his hands cradling her face. "Temperance, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted: love, partnership, a true home, and now a child." His voice roughened with emotion. "I'm beyond pleased. I'm blessed." The following January, as a winter storm howled outside the ranch house, Temperance gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, Maggie for short. Rhett paced the floor of the main room as Mrs. Caldwell assisted with the delivery, his face pale with worry until the first strong cry of his child pierced the air. When Mrs. Caldwell finally allowed him into the bedroom, the sight that greeted him brought tears to his eyes. Temperance, tired but radiant, holding their tiny daughter wrapped in a blanket she had lovingly crocheted during the long winter evenings. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Rhett approached the bed with reverence, sitting carefully beside his wife as she placed the infant in his arms. The baby's eyes, already showing hints of her father's blue, blinked up at him solemnly. "She's perfect," he whispered, one calloused finger gently stroking the downy cheek. "Just like her mother." As the years passed, their family grew. Maggie was joined by a brother, Thomas James, named for the young cowhand who had been lost in the river. Then came another daughter, Elizabeth Ann, with her mother's chestnut hair and gentle spirit. The Rocking J prospered under Rhett's management, expanding to become one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. Temperance continued teaching until their third child was born, then focused on raising their family and managing the increasingly busy household, which now included a cook and several domestic helpers. They never forgot how their love had begun with a near tragedy at the river that had brought them together. Each year on the anniversary of that day, they would ride together to a special spot along the Sweetwater, where wildflowers bloomed in profusion during the summer months. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat beside the now peaceful river, their children playing nearby under Mrs. Caldwell's watchful eye, Rhett took Temperance's hand in his. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing a question from long ago. "About the life you chose?" She looked around at the beautiful land that had become her home, at their children's laughing faces, and finally at the man beside her, still handsome. His hair now touched with silver at the temples, the lines around his eyes deepened by years of working in the sun and wind. "Not a single one," she answered, leaning against his shoulder. "You," he shook his head, his arm tightening around her waist, "only that it took me so long to realize what was right in front of me." "We found each other when we were meant to," she said simply. Everything happened exactly as it should have. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in familiar hues of gold and crimson, Rhett kissed his wife with all the tenderness and passion of their first embrace. "Breathe with me," he whispered against her lips, repeating the words that had once saved her life and now symbolized the rhythm of their years together. "Always." "Always," Temperance echoed, her heart full of the love that had transformed her life that day at the river, a love that continued to deepen with each passing year, as steady and true as the current that had brought them together.